Shalom from Jerusalem. This is another edition of Watchmen Talk, a series of conversations with Israeli experts and practitioners in the fields of military, security, intelligence, and diplomacy. And our guest for a second part of our conversation is retired Brigadier General Dr. Amnon Sofrin, a senior military intelligence and Mossad official. Welcome back.
Thank you.
In our first part, we reached the late 1980s with you after having been wounded as an infantry officer, transferring to military intelligence and climbing up the ranks until you became the intelligence officer of a regular armored division, which happened to get control of the entire West Bank once the Intifada started in late 1987. And then what probably happened is that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. What did you do? What did military intelligence do?
That was later on. I was assigned at that time to be the head of the reconnaissance school. It's a Elim Negev, it's a Elim base. And actually, we had plans to participate in one of the efforts that was planned by the IDF to interfere if needed, going up.
So your unit was supposed to get reconnaissance for this force? Or?
Right. Part of my unit, right.
Because your assignment there was to be in charge of reconnaissance, surveillance, not strategic intelligence, but battlefield.
Very, very tactical intelligence.
And
this the battlefield.
This was one of the lessons you brought from 1973.
Right. And I took advantage of this situation, and I began to train the people to be able to participate in such operation that can be implemented if needed on the Jordanian side and going up, if needed, to other places as well.
You had a black beard, a darker shade of hair at that time?
I was younger.
And by the way, the Brigadier General in charge of the operations division of the General Staff was Meir Dagan, who later became your boss at Mossad. Right. Were you in touch with him at that time?
I knew him very well because I knew him when he was one of the brigade commanders at the division. I was a deputy in this division, headed by General Kahalani. And later on, we met very often, but not at that time. At that time, I was under the control of the Southern Command, directly.
General Vilnai.
Right, because they were responsible for this planning. And after I finished this assignment, I went to the National Defense College.
There was a contingency plan called Fatherland, Eretz Avot, in which you were supposed to outflank the Iraqis by going through Jordan.
Correct.
This was before peace with Jordan.
Correct. And we had the part of it to be the intelligence or what you call the reconnaissance unit of this force. It was due to carry out this mission under the control of this one.
Do you regret not being able to execute this?
No, not at all. I think it was a mistake to do that.
Okay, so...
To violate the sovereignty of Jordan at that time, I think it was unnecessary. But military units usually plan things without being able to implement it if needed, but for the sake of planning, to be prepared if needed.
The very art of planning, of having those sessions, and modeling, simulating.
Right. Always like that.
Okay.
And then I went for a year for the National Defense College, which was outstanding. It was a great year. And then I was assigned to be the intelligence officer of the Central Command, under the command of General Nehemiah Tamari, the late Nehemiah Tamari. And I began my assignment as an intelligence officer on the first week on a huge maneuver carried out by the whole Central Command, and General Tamari asked me before, who has to be the intelligence officer of this maneuver? I said, I think there's no questions. Only me. Because I have 3 more years at least to be here and to implement the lessons I will learn. And he said, later on he said me, I liked very much what he said to me. Even though he didn't pay too many compliments to people, you know, he was a very
Reserved.
sealed man, in a way. So I had a short time with him until he was killed.
In a helicopter crash.
In a helicopter crash in the courtyard of the Central Command on a very dark night and a very tragic night. And then
January 12, 1994.
Correct. I remember that night very well because I almost joined him to fly with the helicopter to the same point because we shared some information regarding this flight. And he said, I understand what you say, but I want to make sure that everything is okay. And he flew there, and he didn't come back.
Along with his aide-de-camp and two
other pilots. Right. And that was a tragic night, and we had to recover, and General Danny Atom came for 3 months as a replacement. And then we had the terrible issue of the Cave of Monarchs in Hebron, the massacre of Dr. Baruch Goldstein, which was a huge event, and later on an inquiry about that, and I was called to testify. And everybody is asking me, how didn't you know that a massacre like that is going to happen? And I said, it's very simple. Because it's not my responsibility. I'm not dealing with Jews. And the intention of Jews to carry out attacks against Palestinians.
You also had, of course, the police and Shabak, especially the Internal Security Agency.
Of course.
But Baruch Goldstein was a reserve captain, a medical doctor.
Right. But he decided to get into the Cave of Monarchs and to kill...
Cave of the Patriarchs.
And killed 29 people while shooting, and then he was killed by himself. And riots went all over the West Bank, and we had to control them and to calm the area.
So the Commission of Inquiry accepted your explanation.
Right.
But did you realize that following that, not only riots, but horrible terror acts will take place, and that Yasser Arafat will not be able, or perhaps not even willing, to control Hamas?
Of course, we knew that. We knew that, and we waited for that, and we expected that, and we were prepared for that. It didn't avoid part of these terror attacks, but nevertheless, it was our assessment.
Can you now, 28 years later, guess at least whether the entire Oslo process would have proceeded otherwise had Goldstein not committed this massacre and the terror acts were then perpetrated?
I don't think that this one affected the Oslo Accords. I think that what most of it affected the Oslo Accords was the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin. That was a great issue.
This is a year and a half later.
Mm-hmm. November 1995.
But both the Goldstein massacre and the Rabin assassination were perpetrated by people who wanted not only to kill, but to affect the political process. And apparently, at least to some extent, they succeeded.
Yeah, you know, on both sides you have the radicals who doesn't want this agreement to be implemented. So Hamas on one hand, headed at that time, or at least the most active man at that time was Yahya Ayash on the Hamas side, and on our side some other radicals.
But he was in Gaza, or did he escape from the West Bank?
Escape from the West Bank to Gaza. After carrying out some attacks, often on buses mainly, and on Dizengoff Street on Purim evening. But on the other side, the Israelis as well, some heretical people that try to sabotage and try to implement or try to avoid implementing this agreement. And in the end, it succeeded partly. Because in the end, the second phase of Oslo Accords was implemented.
So now, as a
meaning giving all the big cities to the control of the Palestinians.
Now, 20 years after you retired from the military and some 15 years after you retired altogether from government service, what is your private view? Was the Oslo process doomed to fail, or could it have been salvaged somehow?
I don't believe in the end that it would be successful. Because I believe that there's too much hatred on both sides. Israelis will not give up up to the end, or up to the last minute, what the Palestinians expected to get, and there is a big gap between their expectations and what they are willing to give. So in the end, I don't believe it can be breached.
And did it have anything to do with the way it was structured as an interim agreement whose end is not predictable? It's not like the peace with Egypt, which was set in advance, but was slated to be executed over 3 years.
I think this is the main reason why they designed it the same way. Meaning they understood that phase A, phase B could be implemented, but the question is what comes next. Nobody really saw a Palestinian state all over Judea and Samaria as a fait accompli.
Yes, Rabin personally never supported
Palestinians. I know he didn't support it. We had some discussions with him and with the General Chief of Staff, Ehud Barak, and nobody really believed that it's going to be fully implemented up to the last minute.
So this was your most frustrating duty, being the Central Command's intelligence officer?
Part of it, because nevertheless, you have to adjust to the new reality. Meaning you get out of the big cities in Judea and Samaria, and you have to be prepared to gather information and to operate or activate from the outside, inside, and not being part or inside the cities. And you had to adjust now all your methods and all your technologies to be able to monitor and to prepare yourself if something happens, to be able to go on like what we did in 2002.
How did Colonel Sofrin become General Sofrin? What job awaited you?
I had another mission afterwards to be the head of the tasking department within the military intelligence. And
which gives officers their new assignments?
Yeah. Not only the new assignments, but to task all the gathering units within the military intelligence to be able to concentrate on the main efforts according to the EEIs, essential elements of information coming out from the Director of Military Intelligence.
The priorities,
correct,
which mean that some tasks get low priority, and then
very low.
If there's some failure, you're being blamed.
Always. You have always somebody to be blamed for it.
Okay, so after that?
After that, about the third year of this assignment, General Amos Malka became Director of Military Intelligence.
And he was a career armor officer?
Yeah, and I knew him for very long years because we served together at Division 162.
Where he was the executive officer?
No, he was a brigade commander.
Because at one time he was also...
Yeah, earlier. And then he said, I ask you to carry on and to carry out this mission for another year because Shchori is going to replace you, Colonel Shchori. He's now at the National Defense College. And if you're willing to stay for another year and wait until he's graduating, I will appreciate it very much. I said, no problem, I'll stay. By
that time, you're 44 years old?
44. And then he called me about 6 months later and said, I see two options. The first one is General Mossad, the chief of general staff at that time, is reorganizing the armed forces. He's now building a new arm, which is called the Ground Forces Command. There are talks about establishing a new corps, which is called the Combat Intelligence Corps. If it's going to happen, you are going to be my candidate for that. And if not, you will suffer. You will go to the US and be there in military attaché or intelligence attaché.
But this is usually at the same rank.
Yeah. And I said, okay, two good options. And in the end, they decided for me how to carry on, and I began establishing this corps, which from scratch. And that was fascinating because you build up units, you build up a military intelligence school for your own, or combat intelligence school of your own, regardless what happens in the military intelligence school. And a part of that, and you instruct people and you train them and you...
But is it beneficial for the intelligence discipline to be outside the intelligence corps and as part of the Ground Forces Command?
There is a debate about that, because if you're in your natural surrounding, like being in the field units, for example, and you have to work with surveillance units or reconnaissance units, you have to be in touch with them. So I train them together as one team. This one is gathering information, talking to the other one, he's tasking them and so on, and they begin to learn to work together. They don't learn to work with other units in the military intelligence. But
you personally were probably invited to all the necessary fora.
Of course. I was part of the management of the military intelligence at that time.
And you still had a green beret, which intelligence officers were?
With other sign on it, yeah.
How did you, was that your last position in the IDF? You decided that there's no point in staying, or?
I decided because I said that I had enough. I don't see any big future waiting for me, because I know the rules of the game. You're not going to be a major general because you're an intelligence officer. And I say, I don't have to wait for somebody to tell me to go home. And I decided to go home by myself. But that was in 2003.
But you didn't go home. You went to Mossad.
No, I didn't expect to go to the Mossad. I didn't plan that.
What happened?
General Dagan gave me a phone call and said, do I hear right? Are you going home? I said, yes.
In late 2002, General Meir Dagan
was appointed to be the director of the Mossad.
Ephraim Halevi, who was one of our guests here on this show.
Right. And I say, you hear right? And I said, are you going to talk to me? I said, of course. And then I came for first meeting and second meeting and third meeting and so on. And I say, look, General, you don't owe me anything, really. Don't feel obliged. I will say hello to you whenever I see you. If you find something that is very, very interesting and very attractive, I will say yes.
Did you have anything in mind?
No, not yet. Really.
Did you know a lot about the Mossad? Of course, you're part of the same community.
I knew because when I was head of the tasking department within the military intelligence, I worked a lot with the Mossad. So I knew them very well. And then at the week that I had to be replaced by General Yuval Khalamish, he gave me a phone call. It was at about 11 p.m. I want you to come here. Say, okay, what are you talking about? I said, I wanted to come and to be the head of the Intelligence Directorate of the Mossad.
Now, this needs explaining. Mossad itself is an intelligence agency. Of course, it also has...
It's an operational agency.
But it's part of the intelligence community.
Right.
And what he offered you was to be the head of intelligence for Mossad.
Right.
Which, in a way, was a promotion to the equivalent of a major general's job.
Correct.
And he wanted you to reorganize the division?
Correct. There was an attempt after the lessons learned from the failure of Mashal event in
5 years earlier.
Amman, yeah. There was an attempt to reorganize the Intelligence Directorate. Not a very successful one at that time. And he called me for that.
Intelligence for Mossad operations or intelligence for the entire Israeli system?
It's both. First of all, you serve the Mossad, and then you're advisor to the Prime Minister, in addition. Okay, and you take part in the discussions in the cabinet with the government and so on. And I've been there for 5 years, and I said in advance to General Dagan, I will come for one position, and I'll do it for between 4 to 5 years. And when I say I had enough, don't stand on my way. Let me go.
You always want to be your own man, to dictate your terms.
No, I don't dictate my terms. I said, if I look at the future, I will never sit on your chair. Because always I'll bring or an operational man or somebody who, from the armed forces that need to be compensated because he wasn't appointed to be Chief of General Staff.
And the Major General in uniform.
Right. And I said, because of that, I know that I'm going to be for one assignment because you call me. And if there's going to be something very attractive later on, we'll talk about it. But if not, don't stand on my way. And that was it. And it was about 5 years. And I think one of the most attractive issues that I ever handled, because you're dealing with everything from the tactical level or a macro tactical level to the strategic one. And you're consulting the Prime Minister, and you're sitting or attending all the discussions being held within the cabinet, within the government, and within what we call the security consultant being held by the Prime Minister, meaning the small group, which is actually dictating and actually designing all the decisions.
Which gave you the germ of the idea for your PhD thesis. But because you were experienced in tasking, and General Dagan was too, what were your priorities? Non-conventional weapons, terrorism?
First of all, let's say that two major priorities were dictated by the Prime Minister.
Sharon.
Meaning, first of all, to try to slow down the attempts of the Iranians to get nuclear weapons. And the second one was international terrorism and the risk for Israelis and Jews all around the world. That was the two main priorities set by Prime Minister Sharon.
International terrorism at that time was Al-Qaeda, probably, right after 9/11.
Only Al-Qaeda at that time. Later on, ISIS became on, but at that time only Al-Qaeda, and mainly to look at the risk for Israelis and Jews abroad.
Was there a risk? There was this Mombasa.
It was after Mombasa, of course.
When terrorists tried to shoot down an Israeli airliner.
An Israeli airliner, and in addition, there was an attack on a hotel where Israel was staying in Mombasa.
And it was an intelligence failure? Your predecessors knew nothing about it?
I think so. I don't really know because I didn't look at the facts too much or too deep, but I think it was a failure.
What about Iran? At that time, Prime Minister Sharon had a policy of not putting Israel at the center of the fight.
At the front.
At the
front line.
At the front line, but still working diplomatically and clandestinely and not doing an overt show of...
Right.
Was that the right policy?
I think that was the right policy for that time. Meaning he emphasized that Israel should not be at the front line. We are going to be only on the backstage, to feed our allies with all the information we had, all the information we acquired from our operations, to be able to use it for diplomatic pressure on Iran and to bring Iran to the Security Council, or to bring the Iranian issue to the Security Council. And that was a huge attempt that we carried on to find incrementing information that in the end brought Iran to the Security Council.
Was it really the Iranian opposition which found out about Natanz and Fordow, or was that a clever tactic to expose it?
No, it was in addition to what we knew before. It wasn't the only source to that issues. And we carried out a lot of activities. Some of them, most of them are very clandestine, to slow down the Iranian advance. And very successfully, I believe.
Did you dispute the American intelligence assessment
On 2007.
but regarding 2003, that the Iranians stopped their Imad operation?
Of course.
You disputed it.
We had a huge dispute about it. And it came to the climax on 2007 when they published the
NIE, the National
Intelligence Assessment or Estimate. And they claimed that since 2003, the Iranians are doing nothing. And we said, how can you say some things? How can you say such a thing? It doesn't really happen. Because it proves to you that they are doing everything under clandestine coverage and working very, very...
So you still think that they were wrong?
Of course.
We will
I think it was political.
General Sofrin, we will stop here and resume our talk for a third and final part soon. Thank you very much for the time being, and we will be back for another conversation with General Amnon Sofrin.